Hello, and welcome to CivilTalk podcast. I'm your host, Tapasia Althouse. If you're new to the podcast, this is where we explore civility and social-emotional learning in the modern world with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, we're joined by Mike Castor, the lead front-end software developer at CivilTalk, who helps create and build products that support offering social emotional learning services. His unique expertise lies in developing user-centric applications that foster better performance and well-being. Welcome, Mike Castor. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah. This is officially our third podcast. We're pretty new to the podcast world, so really excited to have you. I'd love to jump right and talk firstly about your engineering work with CivilTalk and your experience of bringing SEL, social emotional learning, to the forefront of your process.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do that as well. Maybe I can start with just giving a little bit of background about like how I got to where I'm at, and then maybe that will help frame our conversation going forward. So, yeah, I've been working with CivilTalk for the past 4 years as a software developer. I work closely with the whole team to make sure that we build really awesome products that help elevate our mission of bringing social emotional learning to university students and the users of CivilTalk. I became a software developer because I really enjoy building and creating new things that people get to use that make the world a better place. So CivilTalk has been a fantastic experience for me to be able to give what I feel give back to the world, and it's been an awesome journey. My career, I'm actually a career changer. I haven't always been a software developer. Before I was a software developer, I was actually a technical recruiter, and I spent 5 years working at Facebook, where I helped build their Seattle engineering office. So I was actually hired by Facebook to come out and run a university recruiting program that helped grow that Seattle office. Everybody thinks of Facebook being in Menlo Park, California, sort of Silicon Valley, but actually I worked for 5 years in an office in Seattle. And when I got there, it was like 100, 150 people. And over the course of 5 years, it went to over 5,000 people. So I was sort of living in that hyper growth Silicon Valley kind of big tech world, and have a lot of experience just kind of like seeing what that kind of environment is like, in contrast to what we're doing at CivilTalk, which is very entrepreneurial and like let's like kind of build a product from the ground up. So I have like sort of these two, like a dichotomy of these two different backgrounds. And then digging deeper into my past, actually, I am actually a musician, and I went to school and I have a degree in music. So I kind of ended up in tech and in recruiting kind of on accident. And then from there discovered that, hey, what I think might really be awesome is to learn how to code and build things. And actually tied things back into my original passion of being a musician, where I got to create things. So I have like a little bit of a diverse background. So I guess maybe our conversation today can be, some things will come from my point of view of being a software developer, and some things might come from my experience being on the recruiting side of things, and then just knowing that I'm kind of like the whole reason that why I do what I do kind of starts with the ability to create things.
I love that. Thank you. So, bouncing from Facebook to a place like CivilTalk, our team is a lot smaller than the Facebook team. And I'd love to just hear about how civility, and social emotional learning, whether it be soft skills or just practicing empathy, plays into your work as an engineer.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it all starts with empathy. I I feel like my job as a software developer and someone who creates applications and features for an application like CivilTalk, what the point of what we're doing this for is to make someone's lives better, to allow them to learn social emotional learning or to practice social emotional learning, to become more emotionally intelligent. And in order to do that, you do have to kind of like approach things with a sense of empathy. Like how is this going to how is what we're building going to make the world a better place? How can we, what does the user need? What is going to make it going to facilitate the goal that we're trying to get to? So I think that's like core to, and I think that resonates with me in particular, but I think everybody kind of has to think about things that way if you're building something in tech. And I think you also have to you have to put yourself in the shoes of others, and that put yourself in the shoes of your users, the people who are ultimately going to use your product, but also put yourself in the shoes of the other people that you're working with on your team, or if you have a client you're working with. So I think that you need to have empathy for everybody involved, and I also think you have to have empathy for yourself to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. There's a lot of talk in the tech world about tech burnout. There's actually a thing about tech burnout. And I think it's because I'm not exactly sure, I might be grasping at straws a little bit here, but perhaps tech tends to draw people who are very passionate about what they're working on. Not to say that people aren't passionate in other fields, but I feel like along the way, I managed to learn to like take care of myself, like having like good self-care practices that help me continue to be productive and to help everyone around me get to where we're trying to go. So like be a good team member that way.
Right. What is your opinion on having younger engineers and having a connection with empathy? I mean, you've been kind of in the engineering game for a while now, and a lot of your engineers, I mean, I know the other engineers that we all work with are all around the same age. But what's sort of the battle that you have in your mind with like younger engineers who maybe don't have as much of a connection with empathy and boundaries and what they need and how to sort of engage with other people to get something done? So I'd like to know about, and maybe listeners too, CivilTalk is our platform is all about teaching social emotional learning and practicing that. Engineering spaces, do you think it's something that is teachable, or is it something that's just learned over time, or a mixture of the two?
I think anyone can learn. I'm a testament to that. I wouldn't say that I've always been the most empathetic person. And I mean, that always changes from day to day. Like I said, one aspect of that is like self-awareness. Where are you at? If you had a bad morning and you come into a meeting, you come into work, and like, you'd have to kind of have that awareness of, hey, like maybe I didn't get a good night's sleep last night. So I need to kind of be like, especially self-aware of how I'm interacting with others, and also cut myself a break. As far as like other engineers, and particularly people that are younger, I think there's like this misnomer that's going around, like if depending on where you go, there's this like misconception that like, oh, like the younger generation is like, doesn't have social skills or whatever. That has been the farthest from my experience. I continue to be like the students that I've been able to interact with at University of Connecticut in particular, I'm just absolutely astounded with their level of social intelligence, their emotional intelligence, and like their genuine curiosity, and like the way they interact with you is very almost always very professional. And so that hasn't been an issue for me, but I do think, everybody is in a different place, and everybody can learn. And I think like I think everybody's job is to kind of like set a good example and like point people in the right direction. I think there's another myth about maybe technical, like engineering type people who are coders, that they all like to like hide in a closet and not be bothered, which maybe is somewhat true because I personally can go down a rabbit hole and be like, oh, I'm building right now and I really want to like have the space to like to get in the zone and really like work on something. But I think the most important skill of an engineer is actually communication, and like two-way communication, really like being a strong active listener to understand what problem you're actually trying to solve. Because I think that one of the biggest mistakes, or one of the biggest dangers in engineering, is that you might actually misunderstand the problem and build the wrong solution. Because
Right.
now you've now spent all your time and energy and perhaps your team's time and energy building something that no one needs, and then you have to go back and rebuild it. So taking that time up front to be an active listener and engage and like say like, hey, like I think what I'm hearing from you is that you need this. Here's how we might do that. I
Right.
think so. I think engineers, like there's a lot of communication that needs to go into that. And most of the engineers that I've had the pleasure of working with, it's really not been an issue. They kind of all know that because they want to build the right thing.
Yeah. What I like about, it's funny, we're listeners, we have meetings every 2 days, 2 days a week. And when we're on the discussion, one thing I like that you do, actually, that I'll think about later, is when someone is requesting something on the website, what you will 99.999% respond with is, what I hear you saying is this, and you'll respond with that. And I think that's so great to be able to do that, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a marketing person, whatever it is you're doing. And other companies I've worked in, I don't really hear that very often. It's just like, yeah, okay, absolutely. And you want to just kind of appease your boss. You want to please the person who is basically, your boss. But what things like that, like, because it's a tool. That's a tool that you used to actively listen. That's a tool that says, I'm listening to you and I'm going to repeat what you said to me, so you know that I will get the job done. And with that being said, what are some other tools that engineers can or just people working in a small team where you want collaboration to be, a 5-star sort of experience? What are things that you've learned throughout your career like that have helped you?
Yeah, just a quick note on the last thing about the active listening. So self-awareness, I practice that because I know that I tend to move really fast. And then I later realized down the road that maybe I made some assumptions that were not correct. And so I actually made it a conscious habit to practice active listening to ensure that I don't make that mistake, and that I actually really understand what people are saying before I jump to the next thing. And I had to learn that over time through my career. And I've, and that practice has now become, or practice has now become habit. And I do think it makes it's something that I really do rely on, and I think is helpful. Other tools is I'm big on systems thinking. And part of that is probably from my time at Facebook, which was, like I said, like this crazy like rocket ship ride where, there was everybody's, like new people would start on a Monday, and there was like this 1 week, where like they literally like hired an entire floor built. We had like this like 6-story like built like office building that held like a few thousand people. There was like 1 week where they hired so many people that there was an entire new floor of people. Like in 1 week, like on a Monday, just like a whole floor of people showed up. Like it was crazy. And so like, in order to survive in an environment like that, you have to think you have to have systems that you rely on. Like you can't just kind of shoot from the hip on everything. And so I got really good at building systems that I could rely on that would keep me accountable and make sure that I was showing up for people. So from a from a tech, I will make this a little bit higher level because I realize most of our audience maybe isn't engineers, but like having a system in place that you can rely on. Like, for example, we have a biweekly stand-up meeting where we kind of have a process. When we show up to that meeting, we all know, like, hey, we're kind of going to do a round robin. Hey, how are you doing? It's about you. How are things going on? What you're working on? Is there anything that we can do to unblock you? Right. That's sort of like a Scrum stand-up agile, like way of doing things, right? Sort of having that process that you can fall back and rely on. Another good one is one-on-one meetings. Like, you sort of like decide, like, hey, like, let's just set aside 30 minutes every week or every other week, no agenda, but it's just a set time that we set aside that we know that we're going to get together and like catch up and see how things are going. That's another system that you can kind of rely on. And that way, like, hey, like, it doesn't matter how crazy the week is. It doesn't matter if an entire floor of people showed up, on Monday. Like, we know at Wednesday at 2:00, there's going to be 30 minutes where I know I can catch up with you to talk about the important things and see like how we can collaborate. Digging in a little deeper, what I feel like that does well is it allows, number one, it builds trust. You have like, you're both like sort of sharing in a habit, but also it, honestly, like, I feel like the most important reason to do it is because it allows like a feedback loop. And like, feedback is so critical to making sure that you're showing up for your teammates and delivering, and that you're open to how you're affecting those around you, and that sort of self-awareness, so that you can self-regulate. So like, having those kind of open lines of feedback where, if someone that you're working with needs to give you critical feedback, they feel comfortable being able to do it. One way that I think is really important if we're going to talk specifically about software development, is something called a code review. So like, basically having a habit where no engineer submits code that goes to like production without it being reviewed by another engineer. And the idea of that isn't that like, hey, no, you can't trust any of the other developers. It's not like, hey, I don't trust you to submit this code. It's like, hey, let's set this process up where we can kind of build trust with each other to like talk about what we're doing at a team level or at a company level, like making sure that we have some kind of process in place. And what that does is like, hey, like, I noticed that you keep doing this same like pattern with this, I don't know, like a button. Like, I think I like to write it this other way. I don't like, let's talk about, maybe let's codify on like on a one way to do it. That way it's the same no matter what. If some other engineer is to look at it, they would know like, oh, this is that same kind of button. And just being able to have that like open communication that kind of gives people feedback, I think is really valuable. And that's one way that like kind of thinking about things from a systems point of view and like a reoccurring habit really help.
Right. Do most companies already have that in place, or is that something that is kind of implemented after sort of like shit has hit the fan and like communication is it's like companies that just learn through consequence and they're like, this isn't working, so we need to figure out how to do this,
There is definitely a high degree of learn by doing and like making mistakes. Yeah. But right. I mean, our company is small enough that you could get away without doing that kind of a process. You will eventually regret it. But as the company scales, it's a different thing if you have 3-5 engineers. It's a big difference if you have 500 engineers or 5,000 engineers. Like, you kind of, at that point, you kind of have to have some kind of process. And even then, like, for example, like looking back, I wasn't an engineer at Facebook. I was a recruiter, but I worked closely with a lot of engineers, and that's kind of where I learned about that process, is the code review process. They had a very thorough system that they would follow. And even they would end up pushing bugs into production. So like I helped hire a lot of interns that worked as software developers. They were like university students, maybe from University of Connecticut, that were maybe computer science majors who would come spend the summer at Facebook and work with a team of engineers. And one of the big things is like, hey, we want to make sure that you actually get to ship real production code while you're here as an intern. And inevitably, every summer, there would be one intern or maybe more than one that would break Facebook. And it became like this, like, kind of like thing. And
What do you mean?
like they
it
would,
would just go
they would
on.
introduce a production bug that would maybe take down part of the product. I mean, it was just bound to happen at some point. And like, part of that is the engineering culture at Facebook. They have this motto that has become sort of famous as like move fast and break things. I think maybe they've as they've scaled, that may not be quite the case anymore, but like they were basically they have a culture of like of taking risk, like making big bets and like trying things and like um default to doing, as opposed to like there are, like, if you were to contrast them with maybe say like another big tech company like Google has a reputation for like doing a lot of planning and like having a lot of like project planning and like really being cautious about of how they have a release of things. And I've never worked at Google. I know enough about that I've heard that maybe that's true, not always true, but yeah, like,
I mean, that's for Google. They're like the internet. Facebook is like a facet of the internet. Google is like the search engine. Might as well, it's like synonymous with the internet. It's like Kleenex and tissue. It's the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So I guess like kind of like what we were talking about, like, not everybody has, and the review process doesn't have to be. I actually feel like an important point to make about like something as systems is like having a system like this is that it needs to be flexible, and tying it into like the contrast of like working at a big giant company like Facebook versus working at CivilTalk, which is sort of an entrepreneurial, we're building this thing as we go. When I first joined, that was a bit of a, like, I would rub up against the rest of the team sometimes, because I would be like wanting to install process before, probably prematurely, like, hey, we should be having like a dev design. We should be having like a design, like meeting about features that before, we should be following this more strict process. And after a bit of time, I realized that like I was being, maybe I was trying to force my way of thinking on the other members of the team. And in hindsight, I think that they were on the right side in that case, because we were trying to figure out what the company really was, like what the product was. And like the most important thing that we needed at the time was flexibility as opposed to process.
Right. Do you think, so what are the things that, and as someone who isn't an engineer, what are sort of, psychological things that engineers need that maybe other departments don't need as much? Are there things that specifically engineers need in a workspace, in a work environment, that, a marketing team wouldn't need as much? Or, do we need more patience? Do we need more understanding from, upper levels to understand the intensity of engineering jobs, just to make things easier for engineers, because it is a heavy workload, and you're at your computer all day, and it leads to burnout really fast. At least for marketing, like there's a huge fun component to it, like objectively fun component to it. You get to talk to people, you get to like work on Photoshop or Canva or whatever it's colored, right? With engineering, it seems there's a facet of that, but what are things that are needed in a workspace for engineers specifically that people should understand who aren't in that field?
So I think maybe there's probably other professions that this is true, but in my experience, one major aspect of being a software engineer in particular is that you have to be constantly learning. Like, in fact, that's what drew me to the role. It's like, I love learning. sort of a lifelong student. I've like actually spent I've spent more years in college than probably the average person, just taking courses and doing different things, and like having like parts of minors and this and that. And so when I realized, I was like, oh, like this job actually is all about learning. You're learning something new every day. Like you have to be open and flexible to that. So like that has to be sort of like considered in terms of like a software developer's like workload. Like, hey, like we need to do this thing, and like we're trying to do X, and it seems like in order to do X, we're going to need to use this tool that maybe you've never used before. So guess what? You got to go learn how to use this tool, And so like I'm constantly on YouTube, or I'm constantly on blogs. I'm constantly reading tech blogs from other tech companies, like the Airbnb tech blog and the Netflix tech blog, like just to learn like what it is that how they're using technology, or like frankly just being like, I got to figure out how to do this thing. I've never done it before. So like it's on me, so as an engineer, you're kind of in the hot seat because no one else, you're like, that's your job. No one else knows how to do that. If you're in a big team where there's a lot of other engineers, perhaps there's someone you can lean on. But luckily in today's age, we have the internet, we have YouTube, we have LLMs like ChatGPT or whatever you can kind of go to, or GitHub Copilot. There's a lot of different places. The common place is Stack Overflow. There's like it's sort of like a Reddit, like specifically for software development, where you can kind of go and like, hey, like I'm trying to do X, and I think I need to use Y to do it, and it's breaking. Can anyone help me? Right. So I think that's something to be aware of if you're working with developers, is that like, hey, like, I think any good developer has that mindset of like kind of learning new things. However, there is like a limit. Like you should probably not, you do not need to learn a new technology every week. Like, I think that's something that, some software developers kind of get caught up in, and they spend their weekends like learning, there's a hobby aspect to it. Like there's a hobby aspect to it, and there is also like your profession aspect to it. So like you have to make sure that you have those lines drawn. The other thing that I think is important to say, and this might be out of scope of kind of what you were going at, but I think it's really important. I've said this earlier, is self-care, because our job can only be done at a keyboard. Like it just can't be done any other way, right? Like, so like, how do you disconnect yourself from that keyboard and that screen? And to me, when I first took up the skill, when I first started to learn how to do this job, it was actually very different from the role of recruiter, where you're interacting with people all day long. You're on the phone, you're in a meeting, you're in an interview, or you're out at like like networking events. You're like dealing with face-to-face interaction, or like over the phone or video conference, like all day long. Software development does have meetings, but then you also have this time where you're like, you're focused, and you're on a computer, and you're at a keyboard. So I think you have to make a conscious effort to get away from that keyboard. And for me, I personally have, and I know this is actually true of a lot of the other really successful, really great developers that I know, is that they make time to do other things. Like they're into like mountain biking. Like I like to go mountain biking, or they're into music, or they're video games is an interesting one to me. I'm not a video game person, so I feel like that one, I'm not sure how, I guess people can get enjoyment out of that, but for me, I would want to get out of the house if I can.
Right.
Of course, I live in Seattle, where it rains for a lot of the year. So like I like literally have gone, and like, I don't care, I'm going to go for a walk, even though it's pouring rain, just to get out and walk and do something different. And I find that when I do that, I come back and I'm refreshed again, and I can then really move. Like I can be a productive person again. Yeah.
So if you have those, every engineer needs to find their thing for sure, you know. Cool. Well, one last question. What are your thoughts on, you know, engineers interacting with AI and, you know, introducing AI into systems like this? And, you know, what are engineers, because again, someone like me who's not an engineer, I'm assuming, I can assume that most of my listeners are also not engineers as well. What is the relationship that you have right now with AI and moving forward? How do you think that's going to evolve?
That's an interesting, and I mean, it's a great conversation. It's a great question, particularly given this period of time that we're kind of going through. I mean, I feel like you can go out and everybody's got an opinion about AI. It's either, you know, it's either a hype that's sort of over, or it's gonna be the Matrix, and then there's everything in between. I think of it as a new tool that can be used to improve my workflow, and I do use it quite a bit. And it has been a bit of a practice to learn how to learn where it's practical to fit into my workflow. It isn't like it like there's this thing like going around like, oh, AI is going to replace software developers. I don't agree with that, because it can, for one thing, for one thing, you I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like they call it hallucinate, or it'll literally lie. Like it just like makes stuff up. Like if you ask it questions, so like you can't trust it entirely.
Right.
But I do think it's a great tool to get you started on things. Like, or if you're hey, there's a concept called like actually this like it's kind of like rubber duck thinking, and like I actually don't have a rubber duck here. I used to have one, but like if you're working on something a hard problem, like talking about it, and like maybe talking to a rubber duck, like, or whatever, like my dog is here and I'll talk to the dog, like, hey, like I'm stuck on this thing, like I'm not sure what I should do. It's doing this thing, it's behaving like this, and I don't understand why. I do think that like there is a place for LLMs to kind of like help, like kind of help you with that. So like I've used it that way and it's gotten me unstuck. Um, I like I like parts of parts of each of the big models that we're using right now. Copilot is nice. But I actually prefer to like use it to get the idea of what I need to do and then actually write it myself. Um, and then if I'm stuck on something, then I'll have it help me with a problem, as opposed to like, hey, like just write me this entire file of code. Like then I don't understand what it is. I have to kind of like then read it. Is this right? And like check it. And I think I'd just better off like writing it myself. But it's a work in progress. This is a new technology. I don't think it's ever going away. I'm not in the camp of it being totally hype, but I'm also not in the camp of like this is going to turn into Terminator next week. I do think it it I think if you haven't incorporated it into your workflow, you should definitely try it. It's definitely
Right.
a useful tool.
Right. It's definitely a pillar. I feel like I'm in the same boat as well, where, you know, you need to have some sort of balance and use it also as a crutch and, you know, for every once in a while. I feel like in CivilTalk we use it pretty frequently, and it's used in such a healthy way that it doesn't, you know, impede on our workflow at all or cause more stress or anxiety. And I think that's the biggest takeaway too. Hopefully it doesn't get too out of hand in the future where, you know, it's good to do something that's like, wow, is that human, or is that, because even for me in writing, you know, I'll put in something and I have to truly edit it like crazy, or else it's not going to work, you know. So hopefully it stays that way. You know, it doesn't get too good at its job.
Yeah, I think it'll get incrementally better. I mean, I don't know. There are people talking about like these major leaps that it'll make.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it'll do that, or maybe it'll just get incrementally better, and it'll just become a normal part of our day-to-day workflow.
Right. Yes. Let's hope for the
Yeah.
for the case of humanity. And with that being said, we've gone overboard a little bit, but just want to say thank you for being on Civil Talk. I'm sure we'll have you again in the future as well. We have 3 other amazing engineers as well, so hopefully we'll have all of you guys on at the same time, or 2 other engineers. In the meantime, www.civiltalk.com, listeners, if you want to go and check out our website. And we have Mike Castor here. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us and talking about civility and engineering and everything that we do.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. See you next time.
Take care.